Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, or wherever you happen to be around the world. My name is Jared Platt, and you are at Profoto.com, and we are going to be talking about lighting on location, as always. This webinar specifically, we wanted to take a very special piece of gear out because it's brand new, and that is the Air Remote for TTL for Nikon. So very excited that that's out. It's been out for 2 days now. So those of you who have a Nikon camera and have your Profoto gear and you want to start using the two together, your B1 heads will now be controlled TTL with Nikon cameras. So go check out more information about that, and anything we mention here. If you have any questions about the B1 heads or anything Profoto, you can check out the answers to frequently asked questions there at profoto.com /B1 and also /products. So go there. If you have any frequently asked questions, you can answer them there. Also, as we're going through the day today, over on the right hand side in the chat window, you can always ask questions, and we will be looking through those questions, answering them throughout our webinar today for the next hour. So start asking those questions as you have them, but for now we are going to start talking about our session that we had. As always, we kind of do a video and then we'll answer some questions about it and talk a little bit more about it. But I want to introduce our first photo by showing you the final product on the photo. So if we can go to the computer here, and you can see the final image for our first shot. The important thing about this image is that we wanted it to be this dark, brooding shot on the lake. We had a challenging day because there was cloud cover, and then it would go sun, and then cloud cover again, and then sun again. And so as a result of the challenge of the day, we were fortunate enough to have TTL because that was our goal for the day anyway, was to have TTL. So it worked perfectly to have TTL coverage on this. So those of you who don't know about TTL, TTL means through the lens. It's through the lens metering for the flash. And basically what happens in a nutshell is that during the exposure compensation part of the computation that the flash and the camera have to go through, they talk to each other. And so there's a little bit of a pre-flash, and then the camera records that and figures out what the proper exposure should be and sends a signal to the flash, and then the flash either tones down or tones up or does whatever it needs to increase or decrease the power, and then the actual exposure occurs. So there's a lot of back and forth talk between the camera and the flash. Now we're using the B1 head. So during this entire shoot, we're using this head here, this B1 head. It has all of the wireless inside of it, so you don't need to hang a pocket wizard off it or anything like that. You just simply grab the Air Remote and plug it onto your computer or onto your camera, and then it talks directly to the flash. As it talks to the flash, it's going to change the power settings here when it's in TTL. You can also change them manually on your own if you'd like, and turn the Air Remote on to manual. But when you're in TTL, and the entire day today we're in TTL, it's going to be changing this for us based on that conversation that the camera and the flash are having about the exposure. So this is what we're using. During this shoot, we mostly used just a beauty dish. So this is the beauty dish that we were using on the shoot. So let's go and look at the actual scenario here. So in this shot, and I've done a good job at making legend, or you can see that this is our cliffs back here. Cliffs are signified by dotted lines and green lines. Rocks over here, so Sam, our model, is out on this jetty of rocks here. And you can see that she's turned this way. So she's facing the island here, out on these rocks, balancing out there. And we are going to have two lights on this shot. And so we have one beauty dish over here and one regular bare head over here with nothing on it. And the camera is out here. I'm going to be in the water shooting this way for our background. Now the challenge here on this shot is that we have to match the light, our flashlight, and then also the ambient light. But because things are moving, it gets more challenging. So that's where the TTL becomes helpful, because it can fluctuate based on our needs at any given moment during the shoot. So we're going to run this video so you can see what we did during the shoot, and then we'll discuss it a little bit more right afterwards. So let's run that video. All right, so we are here with Sam out there on the lake on our little rock there, perched very precariously, so she can't move much. And I've got Andrew soaked down there, and you can see that I'm kind of soaked. So I'm just going to explain what we just accomplished while I was in the water. We have two B1 heads. One of them, obviously, Andrew has in his hands, and he has a beauty dish on that. No grids whatsoever, just a beauty dish. And then the other flash that you can't see right now, but we'll give you a B-roll of it, is back in those bushes back there, nice and high. The purpose of that light is to separate Sam's back and light that up a little bit. Our challenge here is that we have this nice, bright sunlit sky, but we want a dark brooding shot because we want it to feel, I don't know, mysterious, and those clouds back there can look a little dramatic. So we have a neutral density filter right here on the camera. So that's cutting our light down so that we can shoot. We're shooting with Nikon today, and so the lower ISO on a Nikon is 100, and then you have to go into low mode in order to get lower than that. But we're shooting effectively at a 50 ISO, and that allows us to get a 2/50th of a second at about f4-ish. But because our light is changing a little bit here and there because these clouds are passing by, we're actually shooting this entire shoot in automatic modes. So right now we are in a shutter priority mode, so that we're locking our shutter down at 2/250th of a second, which is our sync speed on a Nikon. And that's fluctuating our aperture just a little bit as the clouds come in and out, and as our light changes. And then we have both of our Profoto B1 heads are on TTL, which means that they're fluctuating just a little bit in comparison to each other. So because they're in TTL, I have them on separate groups. So the A head, or our A group, is in the bushes, and then our B group is out there with Andrew in the water. And I want them to be a little bit different. So I've got the backlight that's lighting Sam from the bushes is at +1 stop. And then Andrew's is at -1/3 stop, so that it's not quite so bright in her face. And that's the ratio that we're using in comparison to the two lights. And then those lights are determining their exposure based on the TTL that is being read through the camera and through the lens of our entire shoot here, which it's very fluctuating in the way that it moves. So the light's changing a lot. That's why we're doing all completely auto type modes. So that's what we're doing. We're going to do a couple more shots and see how things go. But that's the basic outlay. And our whole day today is going to be automatic modes, TTL shooting in challenging situations. So here we go. And I can't take this out with me because then you'll hear Okay, so a couple important notes then. So a question just came in, and by the way, if you have any questions, make sure you put them into the window on the right-hand side in the chat, because we'll be answering those as we go throughout the day or throughout this hour. But one of the questions was, have you noticed a difference between the Nikon and the Canon Air remote? And I haven't really noticed much of a difference in the remote itself, because the Air remote's pretty much the same thing. What I have noticed a difference is the way that Nikon deals with things versus Canon. We're using a D800, and the D800 has a flash compensation dial that takes you down 3 stops but only up 1 stop. And so it's a little limited in the way that it deals with flash compensation. And so I'm not super thrilled with the way the D800 reacts that way. Whereas on the Canon, you can go up and down 3 stops. So anyway, so that's one big difference that I've seen. But the remote itself handles everything pretty much the same, exactly the same. There's not any difference. So what I'm going to show you here is what we were dealing with there in the camera, so that you just really get a good sense of what we're doing. So if I want to take a group up, and this only works, the only time you use the Profoto Air remote to actually change the power on a flash is when you have multiple groups. So if you have multiple groups, different flashes, and you want to have some kind of a ratio happening between the different groups, what you're going to do is you're going to be looking for, you're going to highlight the group that you want, and then you're going to increase the energy on that either by 1/10 of stop, or if you hold the button down, by a full stop. And so if I want something to be over by a stop, and then if I want, say, the B group to be under by 1/3 a stop, that's how I would put those together. Now what happens is whatever the TTL reads in the situation, whatever it decides the proper flash exposure will be, then what it does is it computes that exposure, and then it tells the A group to go up by a stop and the B group to go down by 1/3 a stop. But it's still going to make the assumption that its calculation is correct. If for some reason its calculation is not quite correct, then what you want to do is you want to use the camera. That's where the camera gets involved in bringing down the entire exposure, or bringing up the entire exposure of that set of flashes that have a difference between them, that have some kind of a ratio. So in that case, on the Canon it's different, but on the Nikon there's a little button here on the left-hand side on the D800 that's got a flash with a plus/minus on it. When you push that button, then you get a plus/minus sign. Can you see? Let's see. There we go. So you get a plus/minus there, and then you can roll that down up to 3 stops down, and you can go 1 stop up on the D800. So if for some reason you take the shot and everything's a little too bright on the flash, then you would come into, because you want your ratios to stay the same, but as soon as you realize that all of the flashes are too bright, that's when you would roll this down by, say, a stop. So minus a stop, and that way those flashes aren't overly bright. Or plus a stop if they're a little too dark. Okay, so that's how we deal with that. On the Canon, on the other hand, and I grabbed a Canon as well, just so I can show you that too. On the Canon, same thing. So you're going to enter into the energy modes here. So there's your A and B group. So if you want your A to go up a full stop, and then if you want your B to go down 1/3, that's how you would do that. Notice that you're still in TTL right here. And if you want to go to manual, you would push this mode button and it would go to manual. But we want to be in TTL. So when we're in TTL, now it's going to make the computation on its own, unless we see that it's not quite what we want it to be. And then we need to involve the camera in that. And so on the Canon, your flash compensation is right here. At least this is on the Canon 5D Mark III. There's your flash compensation right there. So if I push that button, then I get a ISO setting here, and I also get a flash compensation dial right here. There. And I just dial that. Oh, here. You got to push that. And then I just dial up 3 stops or down 3 stops. So very simple. So I actually prefer the Canon to the Nikon just because of that, because I have more ability to change the exposure, whereas the Nikon, I'm not sure why they decided one stop up was as much as you ever needed. So that's how you do it on the Canon and on the Nikon. But it's important to recognize what's going on with your camera when it comes to automatic exposures. And so what I want to do now is I want to take a shot without a flash, and I want to, I'm in a shutter priority mode. I'm at 2/50th of a second, and that's going to, the aperture is always going to fluctuate. But I want to take a shot and show you what I get when the camera thinks that it is correct, because cameras are always not very good. They're always incorrect. So I'm just going to take a picture of this white background here. So when I take a picture of the white background, if I look at the actual shot itself, you can see that that's not white. That's gray. And you can see right there in the histogram that it's in the middle gray. That means that the camera is doing its job. So the auto exposure is looking at white and saying, I need that to be middle gray. So it will take it to middle gray and it'll expose it at that. If I want then to change that so that white is truly white, then I have to go into my exposure compensation. That's different than the flash exposure compensation. There's two different buttons. So in this case, the exposure compensation is right here on the Nikon, is right here on the top next to the trigger. I push this button, and when I do that, it gives me, here, there we go. So it gives me that little plus minus, and I can increase or I can decrease the exposure. And so what happens is once I do that, then the camera says, okay, he wants my computation minus a stop or plus a stop. And in our case, because we had dark brooding clouds in the background, and we had a dark cliff in the background, and we had dark water, and everything's dark. And so what's going to happen is the computer inside of the camera is going to say, all that's dark, it all needs to be brightened up to make middle gray, which means that her dress is just going to completely blow out. So what we had to do then is we had to drop our exposure down. So we're going to take that little plus minus, and we're going to take that and drop it by an entire stop. And by doing that, that's going to tell the camera, meter what you need to meter, and then once you've got your computation, drop it down a stop and you'll be in the right spot. All right, so now if the clouds are going over and things are changing exposure-wise, we're always going to still get the right exposure because it's just kind of fluctuating with the cloud cover and the bright sunlight and things like that. Okay, so that's the first thing that has to happen before we even introduce the flashes. So let me show you what that looks like in the original exposure. So the original exposure is that. So you can see how dark Sam is way back there over by those rocks. And right now she's kind of contemplating the fact that she has to go on those rocks because they're kind of slippery and she's in a very tight dress. So, so that's the exposure when we first get there. Now, this is the exposure after the sun comes out, and you can see how harsh it is right on her face here, and you can see that see how dark her eyes are there? So, and how dark the shadow is on her dress and on her knees and stuff. It's very, very dark. And that's because we have so much contrast in the situation. We have a lot of light coming in from the sun and then those dark shadows. So we have to fill that in, and that's where those flashes come into play. So then what we're going to do is we're going to take and put our flash out there in the water. And we wanted a beauty dish to kind of increase the size of that light so that it gives us a softer, more pleasing light. But we didn't use a huge softbox either, because I didn't want it to blow off into and become a sail and blow off into the water. So the beauty dish is a very manageable, nice, soft light, but it's very easy to move around. So once I've got that, now I need to add the light and see what the exposure is going to be. And so what we did is we started off by just taking a picture with both lights on. Our rear light, which is a bare head that's just coming in, and you can see it here on our diagram. So the rear light is just bringing light in like that so that it's cresting right here on her so that we can see her separated from this dark background. And then this light here is coming in like this, and that's what's filling in the shadows that we don't like inside her eye sockets and on her face and on her dress. And so that's what's happening, is she's getting lit from both sides. This is actually a little bit rear of her, and so it's giving her more of a rim light than this one. This one's a fill light. All right, so we start there and we take a picture. And once we've taken the picture, we determine, oh, that's a little bit too bright, the ratios aren't off, and so that's when I increase the bare head by 1 stop in the ratios. And again, we're still on 0 for flash compensation in the camera itself, which means that the TTL is just interacting as it sees fit. So we go plus 1 stop on the bare head, and then we don't want the flash to be too overpowering and flatten her out too much from the soft white beauty dish here on the right hand side, and so we go minus 1/3 stop on that, which is not much, but it's a subtle difference. And then once we have all of that, then we took our entire set of flashes and we dropped that by 1 stop so that it's not quite as bright as the background. We don't want it to just blow out. We want it to be more subtle. And so that's where we come back into our little setting here, push the flash compensation, and then dial it down by minus a stop. So that's how we set up the whole situation. And if you understand that, then throughout the rest of the day as we go through these, I can just tell you those things and you understand what we've done. Okay, so in this particular situation, because we have a person holding a flash, and it's not like we could put him further out into the water, you know, because we wanted all this space. So we had to put him right by her, and that causes a problem. The problem is that the flash is there, the pole is there, Andrew is there, as well as some light from his flash is in the water. So we got to get rid of that. The other one is fine. It's hidden back behind here, so we're not seeing it. So at that point, what we want to do is we want to remove Andrew from the shot. So I'm going to show you how we did that inside of Lightroom, and then I'm going to show you 2 other little tricks that we did as we worked on the file, just so you have an idea of how we got the final finished file. So the first thing that we did is that we went into Lightroom, and I try to do as much as I can in Lightroom. I thought maybe I might need to do this in Photoshop, but it turns out that I was fine to do it in Lightroom. And so what I did is I went into the Develop module, and this is in Lightroom 5. I was able to click on the spot removal tool, and this is what used to just be for like removing spots from like dust spots in the air or maybe a Coke can floating in the water or something like that. But now the spot removal tool also allows you to remove an entire, just click on it and start dragging around it, and we're just going to paint out that light right there. And so now we can just drag that anywhere we want.
Jared, can you zoom in a little bit?
Yes. So there we go. Hang on 1 second. Let me just zoom in a bit here. There we go. So you can see, whoops, you can see how we were able to, hold on, I'm getting, there we go. You can see how we're able to take that light and remove it. Now there's still a little piece there that we have to deal with, but you kind of have to deal with it in stages. So now I'm going to take care of the pole. So I'm just going to go up and down the pole, and I can get Andrew in the same swatch here. You just have to fill him in. And now it's going to look for us. I don't know why it chose the sky, but that's not what we want. So we're just going to choose a spot here. And you can see that I'm just building out that background. Very simply done. And then the last things that we want to do is obviously get rid of these little spots here. And you kind of tweak around with this and change things a little bit. But in the end, this is what the final shot looks like. And let me go to the... Okay, so here, see, those are all my pins. Those are the pins that were used to get rid of Andrew and the light. So it's just a matter of clicking on things. Most of the pins, that you can see that Andrew only in the light took 4 or 5 pins, but then the rest of it, all of these pins here, were to get rid of all those little tiny spots all over in the water. And then we did some burning and dodging and darkened things up a little bit, but I want you to show you what I did here. This is much darker than the final shot. You can see that the final shot, she's much lighter. So I have a general rule, and that general rule is that when you are working on a file, when you're shooting the file, you want it to be as bright as possible without blowing anything out. That way you have as much detail as you can, because there's far less detail in the blacks in a shot than there are in the whites. And so we really want to make sure that we're as hot as possible without blowing anything out. And so in that case, what we did is we shot the whole shot a little bit bright, but I wanted those cliffs and the clouds and everything to be really dark and brooding. So what I did is I took 2 shots. Well, I took 1 shot, but then I made a duplicate of the shot, and I made 1 bright and 1 dark. And then when I go into Photoshop, I just merge the 2 and paint Sam out in the light one, so that she's the light part, she's the light. So we do the exposure for her, and you can see if I go here, this. Oh, let's see. So this is the exposure for her, and then this is the exposure for the surrounding area. And then I just simply merge those 2 into Photoshop as layers, and once they're in layers, I can then just paint her back out, and that's how we get that. All right, so that's how we accomplish the shot. You can see in the clouds there's a little bit of texture. I ran it through a texturizer inside of Nick's software to kind of give it this dark brooding look. But in the end, that's the finished shot. And it all stems from this happening here. And I'm going to reset this so that you can see. There we go. So Andrew's back in. But again, looking at this schematic, it's simply a soft white beauty dish minus a 3rd stop. It's a +1 stop bare head to give her a backlight here. And then we're shooting here in shutter priority. We're minus a stop in order to make the entire scene a little darker. And then we're minus a stop on the 2 lights in the flash exposure compensation in order to darken them up a little bit. So that's our first shot. Let's go to our second shot, and let's just play the video. We did an extra shot in the water. I just want to show it to you. Go ahead and play that video, and then we'll be back to talk about it. All right, let's just talk about what we just did. After having Sam up on the rock, I thought it would be really cool for her to have to get wet like the rest of us. Besides that, I thought this dress would look cool if it looked like maybe it was longer than it was. And so I wanted her to be the Lady of the Lake, kind of coming out to like deliver King Arthur's sword or something. So anyway, so we brought her down off the rock and put her in the water. But when we did that, it gave us the opportunity to change the lights up a little bit. We still had a backlight on her, and so the back of her was lit by the light that's still in the back in the bushes, but we moved it around even further to her back because the sun is right up here. The sun was forward of her, and it was creating some pretty ugly shadows. So then we took the beauty dish and put it just above the lens, and you can see that we're just right above the lens, and that's what's filling in those shadows and helping to remove all of the ugly shadows created by the sun. And so that's what fills her in and gives us that nice, beautiful, soft, evenly lit light. So that's what we just did, and that looked pretty cool too. So okay, good job, Sam. All right. So let me just go straight to the shot here. So you can see this is before the flash. So we are getting hard light from the sun, and you're seeing in her eyes, it's just totally dark inside of her eyes. But once we add the flash, you can see that she gets a lot more light inside of the eyes, which is much nicer, much more pleasing. And that's simply because we have that B1 head, there. And then, of course, we have the 3rd shot, and that's our final adjusted shot, and that's the final way it looks. I did a little smoothing on her skin, but let's just look at that, though. That schematic. So when you look at the schematic, here we are, and the most important thing to notice was how close the beauty dish was to the lens of the camera. If the beauty dish were too far separated from the camera, then it would cause its own shadows. If it was too high, it would cause its own shadows on her face. So if I took the beauty dish and had it way up here and it was coming down, then I would still get shadows on the eyes. And so the beauty dish had to be brought down so that it's right here above the camera and just off to the side, so that it fills in those shadows a lot nicer. Again, we were -1 stop on the exposure for the background. So in shutter priority mode, -1 stop, because we want this to be darker. But then on the beauty dish and the bear head, we're pretty much the same situation as we had before. It just happens to be that the soft beauty dish is a lot closer to her. The bear head was pretty much in the same position, just a little further back. And then our sun is right over here, giving her a lot of hard light. And that's what this is for, is to fill in those little shadows. So that's the entire thing. But I wanted to show you one thing that happens occasionally when you have a flash like this, and that is, look right here on her shoulder. You can see a shadow from her face. So if you come in close, you see that shadow? That shadow is her nose and her chin. And it doesn't look good. It looks kind of like I don't know, it looks like a piece of cloth, or it looks like a burn, or it just doesn't look good. And so when I go into Photoshop, I remove that piece, and of course I added some grain and stuff to stylize this, but I removed that. And the way to remove that, I just wanted to show you how to do that, so that if you ever run into an issue where you have that, you simply go into Photoshop, you're going to edit the photo. So I hit Command E, which opens that file in Photoshop. And when I'm in Photoshop, I simply need to, we're reading the raw file right now. There we go. All right, so once I'm in here, I'll just make a copy of this background here. Once I've made a copy of it, then I'm going to go in and use the stamp tool and zoom into that shoulder where I need to get rid of that. And I'm going to choose, instead of choosing so I'm using the stamp tool, but instead of using a normal mode, I'm going to use a lighten mode. And then I'm going to collect from over here on the skin, and the opacity at 30% is good. Collect from the skin here, and then I'm going to go over here and just paste. And you can see how it's lightening that shadow up, and I just need to just go like this, and see how I'm losing that shadow, and now it's almost gone right there on her shoulder. And because I'm in this lighten mode, it's not going to make the skin super ugly soft, because it's just taking the lightness of that and moving it over. It's not necessarily copying the texture and stuff like that. So that's the way to remove a shadow that's a little unwanted. And you can do the same thing on the face, or any kind of shadow in an armpit, or right here you can see there's a bit of a shadow still. So you can remove those types of shadows simply by using the lighten mode inside of your stamp tool. So I just wanted to show you that so that you have an idea of how we ended up from having this kind of shadow to, in the end, having this kind of beautiful skin. And occasionally you just have a stray mark like that, and when you're on the fly, sometimes you don't see it in the camera. So you just have to deal with it after the fact. Okay, shot 3. Shot 3, we are going out onto a road that has some water. This is a fun shot, but it requires TTL, not necessarily, at this point the sun is nice and bright, there's no clouds passing over, but we still want the thing in TTL because we're all moving. And because light is very sensitive when it comes, if it gets closer, then it exponentially gets brighter. And if it gets further away, it exponentially gets darker. And so you have to be very careful about that, because it gets bright fast and it gets dark fast. And so with the TTL, that allows us to be walking, and if the distance changes, it's not such a bad deal. So let's roll shot number 3. So we're here on a road where we have the river spilling over the road. We wanted to have Sam kind of walking and kicking through the water on the road. So in order to do that, that means that I have to be moving, she's going to be moving, and Andrew with the light is going to be moving. So we've got it in TTL mode so that if Andrew happens to increase or decrease his distance from Sam, it won't change the power of the flash, because the power of the flash is going to be fluctuating based on what the needs of that current exposure are. But what we've done is we've taken the TTL settings on the flash, and you do that here in the camera again. You don't do it up here. This is just triggering the flash. The actual flash power is coming from the flash exposure compensation here inside the camera, and that's what's controlling the TTL exposure, because we only have one flash. We don't have two groups of flashes like we did out on the lake. So as he comes forward, I've got that TTL powered down by 2 stops. So I've got the sun, and that's the rim light on her head, and then I've got the flash, which is filling in the shadow side of her face. If I had the TTL at 0, then it would fill that in way too much, and we would end up with a very flat shot. So in order to keep a little bit of shadow on the forward side of her face, we drop that TTL down by 2 stops, and that gives us a nice volume to the shot. So she still feels naturally in shadow a bit, but she's well lit. So let's go take this shot, and then we'll show you some of the results. All right, Sam, if you could get right there. Andrew, if you could take your position right there. And then if you just want to walk towards me. All right, just a minute. All right, and go. Nice. Okay, so that's that final shot.
We're going to take a couple more shots here,
as they're moving,
we'll show you the results in studio.
Whoops, there was more to that. Okay, so as they're moving, Andrew has to keep moving, but he's going to fluctuate in his distance from her, and so that's why the TTL is really useful. But very important, here on the schematic, you can see what we've done. So the TTL flash compensation is -2, but it's, again, it's not -2 on the air remote, because remember, we're only using one flash, so it's not done up here. It's done inside the camera's flash compensation, -2, in order to keep it, because that sky in the back is really, going to trick the camera and the flash. But important is that the camera now is in manual mode. What I found is that the camera is worse at auto exposure than the flashes are. So sadly, cameras are worse at auto exposure. These B1 heads with the remote are better at auto exposure than the camera itself. And so what I find is that because I was moving around and I was showing sky and not showing sky, things were changing, and the camera itself was really screwing up the auto exposure. So we locked in the manual mode for the exposure. So we were at 100 ISO, we were at 200th of a second at f3.2. And so we locked that in on the camera, but we still maintained the auto exposure in the TTL for the flash itself. That way the light on her would change based on the distance of the flash to the subject. So that's important as we were walking. I wanted to also show you something else that happens as a result of, and this will help you to understand the difference between shooting with a sky in the background and shooting without. So if you look at this shot here, this is the final shot, you can see that that sky is telling the flash and the camera to really brighten up the exposure of the flash in order to try and match this and this, and you can see there's a lot of sparkles here in the water. But once I turn the camera down and I start shooting like this, look how soft the flash becomes. Because now that whole bright sky is not there. And so it's saying, oh, well, I don't have to be as bright. And so the TTL is dialing down the exposure here. So you really have to pay attention to which direction you're facing and what's in the shot before you start determining what kind of TTL you're going to use. So in this case, what I would need to do in order to make this, and I like this shot better anyway, but in order to make this shot work, I would have needed to then say, okay, I want to increase the flash exposure compensation, and rather than being minus, I might make it even or make it minus a third a stop or something like that. But again, that would be inside of the camera's flash exposure compensation. Okay, so let's answer a couple questions here. The first question was, what's the difference between using a B1 head with the TTL air remote and say, what was the, oh, like an Einstein with a Vagabond or something like that. And the big difference is that when you have a flash head and then you have a cord and then you have a big battery pack that you're hauling around, it's not quite as, I mean, you saw how easy it was for Andrew just to walk around with that thing. You know, I can take this thing off of its stand and I can just point it. Boom, 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 you know? So it's like a big gun. And so the battery pack is right there on it. Very easy to remove, very easy to put back. So it's a very self-contained system. No cords, no nothing. So I just can't get over how easy this is to use. So that's the major difference. The other difference is that the TTL on the B1 head with the TTL air remote is so fantastic. It really nails the shot. It does a great job. So it's very seldom do I really have to do much other than just snap the shot and maybe dial something up and down on a ratio, and then I'm done. So the TTL on this is amazing. The other question that came in was, can you go from auto TTL to manual on the air remote and then back and still keep the settings? And yes, the answer is yes. It's simply, if I'm inside of the air remote and I dial up, say, a stop on the A group. Let me get there so that we can see. There we go. So I'm stop on the A group, and then I like everything that I got, and it powered up the flash just right, and it's perfect, and nothing's going to change. Then I'll just hit manual, so I'll push that little button, and it goes to manual, and then I can shoot all day in that mode, and it'll stay at exactly the same power no matter what happens outside. But then if I decide I need to reconfigure the TTL because, say, a cloud came over or something like that, I can turn it back to TTL and see how the settings still exists. So we still have the same settings inside of the air remote. I can fire away, it'll recalculate those TTL settings, and then if I know that it's going to stay that way for a while, I just push it back into manual and then I can fire, and it's not going to change. So the way they've designed this is really good, because then you can get a real quick exposure reading based on your ratios and exposure compensation dials inside the camera, get that exposure, and then go to manual and shoot. And it won't change based on, you know, your composition, whether or not the sun gets included and stuff like that. So we stayed in TTL this whole time. And when we stayed in TTL the whole time, it was kind of in order to do all TTL. But normally what I would do is I would get in TTL, I would get my exposures, and then once I had the exposures, then I would click over to manual and I would shoot. So, but we did the whole thing in TTL and it worked pretty well. All right, so let's go to shot number 4. And in shot number 4, you're going to see us working, but I don't think we have sound on shot number 4. So just roll that and I'll keep talking over it. In shot number 4, she's stable. She's not moving around, so I'm able to just kind of play with things. And you can see that we've moved Andrew over to the left-hand side, and I'm shooting back towards those mountains, and I'm including a little bit more sky in there. But the important thing to see on this, and go to my computer here, and I'm going to show you before and after. So this is before. This is no flash whatsoever, and you can see that we're getting the rim light there is from the sun. So I like to always use the sun as that main backlight if ever possible. So I've exposed her based on making sure that her shirt doesn't blow out, that her hair doesn't blow out, and that the sky is acceptably bright or darkened. And then after that, I'm going to add the flash, and that's the difference with the flash. So it's a huge difference by adding that flash. And this was simply just TTL. I'll show you. In this case, it's the same situation, except instead of having the camera here, we move the camera over here, and instead of having the flash here, we put the flash, you know, right here. And that was it. That was the difference between it. But the TTL just keeps working and keeps firing away and gets the right shot. Okay, so now let's go to shot number 5. I like this shot a lot. So let's roll this. This is where we start using ratios again, but we also start playing with the way that we wrap the light around her. And so I like this discussion. So let's roll with this.
All right, we're here in a little river here. We've got Sam over on a rock, and we're using 2 lights on this. The sun is still kind of a muted backlight on her, so we're getting a little rim light on her. But we're going to light the side of her face so that we get a nice volume to her face. I'm going to be shooting over there next to where Andrew is. So this is our primary, and it's the strongest light source that we're creating. And we're just wrapping from the sun. So the sun is our big light source. It's giving us the strongest light. It's wrapping around to here, but then she's in shadow. So we take this light and we start wrapping the light further around. And this light is going to be +1 on TTL. And then as we come around to Andrew, we want to further light her. So we don't want her to get too dark on one side. Otherwise this would create a really heavy shadow. So he's -1 stop. So there's 2 stops difference between this light, Andrew's light, which is our front light, and the side light, which is this light here. And it also has a grid spot on it. The reason we have a grid on it is so that the light isn't casting everywhere around on these rocks. It's just really mainly hitting Sam only. And it's zoomed all the way out at 10 so that it's a pretty wide spot, but it doesn't fill the surrounding area. So we're going to be shooting from over there. Again, we've got the sun in the background. That's our hair light. The sun wraps around to about here. We finish the wrap with this light, our side light, which is +1 stop on the TTL. And then it wraps around to Andrew, which is -1 stop to just kind of do a nice fill and give some catch lights in the eyes. And that's all we're doing. We're going to shoot the shot. So when I first shoot this shot, I'm going to initially just get the exposure from the sun, which is going to give us these beautiful little lights all over this, all over these reeds here. So they're all backlit and they're glowing. Sam's hair is glowing just like the reeds. And so she's got these nice rim lights on her legs and on her hair and on her back. So if I take the shot without the lights, I get a pretty dark Sam, but I get a beautiful backdrop. And now I'm going to turn on the lights. And again, we want to, our A group is going to be up 1 stop, and our B group is going to be down 1 stop. And we're going to fire. Quite beautiful. So let's just fire a bunch of these, Sam. Trying to get most of the shot is reeds and river. Sam's just kind of a little part of it. So she's just kind of hanging out there, enjoying her summer.
Okay, so if you go to the schematic here, I just want to show you that it's important to recognize how this sun wraps. So the sun is coming here and it's getting her all the way, you know, like to there. That's what it's getting, and then it's rim lighting all of her. This light then becomes the wrap, so it helps to push the sun further around this way. And it's bare head because it's going to mimic the same kind of feel as the sun. And so we're just doing it straight on. So we want her nose, there's her nose. We want her nose facing that light. So that light is going on either side of her nose and just filling in any shadows that are being created here, so that it feels like, even though the sun's coming this way, it feels like the sun is kind of wrapping around a little bit more. And then this one here, this flash here, is just filling in the areas there. Now, on that shot that you just saw, go to the shot in my computer, you can see how evenly lit she is, which is not exactly what I wanted. And so all I had to do then was to take this bare head here that we were barreling in towards her here, and instead of doing -1 stop, we actually in the end took it down -2 stops. And once that happens, now look at the shot. So I'm going to zoom in there. See that? That is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful light. It looks super soft, And in a very, very harsh sunlit condition, you can create very, very soft light. And we have two bare heads. This one actually has a zoom reflector on it and a grid in order to keep it going straight. But really, they're essentially bare heads. There's not any softness happening as a result of these, you know, like a softbox or anything. And yet, that's the kind of light that you're getting from it, because you're mimicking the way the sun looks, and you're bringing it around her. You keep wrapping it around her. So give me two lights and a sun, and I can make some pretty soft light, even though I don't have a softbox. Just pay attention to the way that wraps. It starts here and it wraps around here. Too many people try and combat the sun rather than work with it. So we're working with the sun and following the natural feel of the light. But I really think that turned out very, very beautiful because of that -2 stops. Remember, before it looked like that. See how bright that was? And so by taking that down, just one stop, we're able to really make it and give her a lot of volume. Okay, so a couple more questions and then we're going to be done with our webinar. First off, let me remind you that our next webinar is coming up next month on October 22nd. So tune in for that. We're going to be going on location at weddings. So real weddings, and I'm going to be photographing and doing portraits really quickly with the Profoto B1 heads and the Air remote. So just tune in for that, real weddings, and so we'll be talking over the top of them. Couple questions though as we're doing that. Number one, can I use the same B1 heads with Nikon and with Canon? Absolutely. So the B1 head is exactly the same no matter what. There's only one model of the B1 head. The thing that changes is your Air remote. So you need to just get an Air remote for Nikon or an Air remote for Canon, and if you have both, just get an Air remote for both of them, and then you can fire away at will and the B1 head will work. So that's that question. Another question, oh, I think we answered that. How are the flashes powered? It's just a battery that hooks onto the side of it. And by the way, the battery charges in about an hour. So as long as you have the quick charger. So I like the quick charger. How is the B1 head attached to the monopod? Does the monopod have adapter? Yeah. So when we attach it to the monopod, we just take a camera plate and we get a post and screw it onto the plate and then attach it. So it's very easy to, then I have a monopod that works as a light stand and it works as a camera stand, either way. Let's see. Oh, there was a question about the little exclamation mark on my remote. Because I got this before they actually released this so that we could film the video, it just says this is a beta version. So that was the early beta. We worked on the beta version, so you're actually getting the final version. So we were working on the beta version, and that's all that means. And then why are you on spot metering? Oh, are you on spot metering or evaluative? I always shoot on evaluative, especially when I'm moving around because I want the camera to do some computations. If I'm doing manual and I have some time, then I'll turn it into spot meter and I'll look at certain things and I'll meter them based on that. But if I'm moving around and I'm in an auto mode, the spot meter is a bad idea because as you change, you might hit the dress and then the exposure is going to be completely different. So evaluative will keep it much more stable when you're in auto modes. And then there was a follow-up question to that, which was, why didn't you just shoot in manual mode on the camera rather than in auto modes? And that was because we had changing conditions. You notice that once the conditions stabilized and the sun stayed overhead constantly, we went into manual mode to shoot this shot and a couple of the shots on the street with the water on it. But when we had clouds passing by, we wanted to be in a auto mode because we wanted to be able to have the camera adjust as needed. So that's why we're in an auto mode instead of a manual mode. Let me see if there's any other questions that I can answer. Well, that looks like it. Okay, so I think we're out of time actually. Are we? How much time do we have? Couple minutes. Great. Okay, so let me scan through. I think we have one more question here. Okay, can I use my Nikon SB900s with the B1 heads together? Yeah, absolutely. You can use any other flashes with it. In fact, on our last webinar, we showed how we used a Canon speedlight to add a little light to a glove. So you can absolutely use these and other heads. In fact, you can turn these into completely manual flashes and trigger them with a pocket wizard if you need to, or just by they can also trigger just based on seeing a flash go off. And so you can add these to any kind of a light kit that you need. Generally speaking, I like to start with the Profotos, and then if I need to add a light here or there, then I'll add them. I think the Profotos are much more consistent with their color and their exposure and the brightness, and it just doesn't fluctuate as much. I have other flashes in my toolkits, and they're much less robust. A speedlight doesn't have the power that a Profoto B1 head has, so you can't get quite as much power out of it when you're out, combating the sun. And then also, I just haven't found flashes that are as consistent as the B1s or as Profoto. So generally speaking, I would start with the best lights you have, and then I would add other lights as needed to fill something in or to rake some light somewhere or something like that. So that's when I would start employing other lights. Let's see. And that's it. Okay. Well, do remember that we have another webinar coming up on the 22nd of October. And that is where we're going to go on weddings, and we're literally shooting real weddings, showing you how we're lighting on those weddings, portraits, things like that. So it'll be a sneak peek into actual weddings that are occurring. Also, we'd like to give a big shout out, thanks to Profoto, obviously, for making such great gear. I want to thank Tether Tools for all the cool, nifty things that they make that allow me to put stuff on stands and hold things. We also want to thank a very, very big thanks to Lens Pro To Go. They're the ones who provided us with the Nikon camera, because I shoot Canon, so I needed a Nikon camera, and they sent it on out. Super easy to send it back, and they're fantastic. So thank you, Lens Pro To Go. Also, if you're interested in tuning in, I've got more webinars coming up. Profoto, obviously. Next week I'll be doing a Lightroom webinar with Shoot.edit, and that's on the 23rd. If you want to get a link to that, just go to jaredplatt.com, and that's where you can find out my entire schedule and know what I'm doing at any given time. Thanks again to everybody for joining us, and we appreciate it. And keep in mind that you will be able to watch this video recorded on the Profoto blog in a couple days. So just be aware of that. All of them are recorded. All of them can be watched later. And one last thanks to Triple Scoop Music for all the intro and outro music that we use during our live broadcast. So thank you much. We'll see you next month, and take care.